all the phrases that are meant to be reassuring but usually aren't, probably one of the scariest things to hear are the words, "Do not be afraid." Our first instinct is probably to wonder, why might I be afraid? Is there a spider in my hair? Is a cult moving into the neighborhood? Is there a meteor headed this way? Do not be afraid is usually followed by some difficult, maybe even alarming news. And when Jesus says, "Do not be afraid," we can almost bet he's about to give us a hard teaching. Wouldn't we know, that's just how today's lesson begins from Luke 12, starting at verse 32. The reading starts with these suspicious words. "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." That's not so bad. Sounds okay, right? But wait, there's more. "Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet, so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master finds alert when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit down to eat, and he will come and serve them. If he comes during the middle of the night or near dawn and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. But know this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour." Well, I'm not sure which is the scarier part, the idea of a thief coming to break in or selling all my stuff to give away. But then again, if I do that, I probably don't have to fear a break-in. But for all of the things in that passage that sound ominous, worrisome, or maybe just plain confusing, which causes its own kind of anxiety, remember that Jesus prefaced it all with the words, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." The comfort here, why Jesus' disciples, past and present, are not supposed to be afraid, is rooted in our identity as Jesus' flock. With Jesus as our shepherd, we shall not fear. Furthermore, we are God's children, and as such, it is God the Father's good pleasure to give us a precious gift, our inheritance, God's own kingdom. Sounds pretty nice. You ready for your crown and your scepter? But really, what does it even mean to inherit the kingdom of God? Well, if you were the heir of a king and you inherited the kingdom, it would mean much more than a bejeweled crown and a velvet throne. It would mean a whole lot of responsibility. As heir to a kingdom, every newly minted king or queen quickly learns of their obligations to rule wisely and help those in their kingdom. What comes to my mind is the scene from Game of Thrones when the ambitious character Daenerys is first recognized as queen of an established kingdom. Pleased with her success, she takes her magnificent seat for the first time upon her new throne, only to face a never-ending line of supplicants, each one poorer and more desperate than the one before. It turns out that inheriting a kingdom is a lot of work, as Jesus himself says later in the same teaching. From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required, and from the one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded. That's verse 48. What is demanded? What is required of us, we who are part of Jesus' flock, the children of God, to whom it is God's good pleasure to give the kingdom? It is, according to Jesus, to sell our possessions and give help to those in need, which generates a few questions. Like, do we have to? I think so. Does Jesus mean for us to sell everything we own? That I don't know. This applies only to people in certain tax brackets, right? I wish, so did Peter. He said, "Lord, are you telling this parable for us or for everyone?" This uncomfortable teaching of Jesus, who was not sent to proclaim good news to the prosperous, but to the poor, Luke chapter 4, verse 18, calls us all to a life of generosity, of giving, so that everyone might have enough. Now, I can't tell you what exactly that's going to look like for you financially. That is something you have to work out with God, something every disciple of Jesus has got to figure out, and it might not be easy. But as Jesus said, do not be afraid. For participating in God's kingdom is not meant to be a joyless burden. Jesus said that it is God's good pleasure to give us this gift, because it's a good gift. When we learn the practice of giving stuff up, we free ourselves to experience the joy of blessing others by our gifts. Instead of obsessing over the accumulated wealth like the rich fool in the parable Jesus had just finished teaching earlier in the same chapter, members of Jesus' flock are encouraged to open their hands, our hands, into the shape of generosity, giving what we can. Yes, material resources that bless others, absolutely, no question about it. Financial generosity is a spiritual practice that we are meant to cultivate, and the rewards are many. But being stewards of God's kingdom is about more than check writing, as valuable as that is. It's also about identifying the needs of one's community and putting our whole hearts into those needs through our actions. Don't take it from me, take it from Jesus, the shepherd of his flock. Be dressed for action, he says, because God's kingdom is built by actions, and we who have inherited the responsibility for that kingdom, we are the ones called to action, to do the work that brings God's kingdom into being here on earth where we are. What those actions are might look different from place to place. Each community has its own particular needs. But may I share with you a word of inspiration that I heard this week. I read an article in the New York Times that addressed a topic close to my heart and relevant to our community: children living in poverty. The premise of the article is this: children raised in poverty risk staying in poverty their whole lives. While there are many factors that can help them break out of the cycle, one factor not to be underestimated is friendship, right? It's logical. When poor children are connected to their more affluent peers and the families of those kids, they are much more likely to see opportunities for their own future and to gain information and practical support that can make all the difference. This is encouraging, right? Yes, except the data shows that kids are increasingly less likely to develop cross-class friendships, partly because of unequal access to the activities that connect kids outside of the classroom. For example, as more affluent families enroll their kids in youth sports, which tend to include expensive travel teams, the poorer kids are literally left behind. Anything that is paid to participate, the poorer kids just can't do. I've seen this in our own community. This article I read, it was nailing it, and then I scrolled down to a subheading that really caught my attention: how churches shine. And you can guess what came next, because we know what Jesus had in mind when he talked about building the kingdom of God. And that's essentially what this article said. It said that churches and other religious groups might have some lessons to teach other parts of society. How about that? It stated that although many churches, as we know, are socioeconomically homogenous, those with some diversity do tend to foster more cross-class interactions than most other social activities. I believe that. Churches have lower levels of what researchers call socioeconomic friending bias. The kind of community that churches are best at building, that's exactly what kids need, right? Places where they can mix with peers who are unlike them. In our faith communities, we learn to love people who are not like us. This is where we learn to value one another despite our differences. When we put our hearts into these relationships, what rich treasures we can find. What if we could share that with the children in our own communities? So here is our opportunity, little flock, to reach for the gift that is God's good pleasure to give us, the kingdom of God for which Jesus drew up the plans. It's time to light our lamps and dress ourselves for action by asking ourselves, how can we build that kind of community for our local kids, a place where all of God's children are honored and cherished? In our congregation here in Fall River Mills, I am inviting people to participate in one or two simple things in the next couple of weeks, things that can bless the teachers and the kids in our community, because that's where our heart is. Maybe that's your calling too, wherever you are. Or maybe you feel called to another type of service. Whatever it is, I do want to encourage you to find a way to offer whatever blessing you can. Now, I know it takes some courage. We wonder if we have what it takes. Will it be enough to make a difference? What if things don't go as planned? Oh, we can talk ourselves out of service in a heartbeat, I get that. But do not be afraid, little flock, for it is God's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. And when we put our heart into it, there we will find our greatest treasure. Let this song